Trains. For 200 years, they have moved people from point A to point B. Across the past 2 millennia, trains have inspired many new kinds of public transit, all tasked with making quick transportation more accessible to the general population. Examples of these modes of transit include underground subways, streetcars, and PeopleMovers. PeopleMovers are defined as, quote, a means of transportation, in particular, any of a number of automated systems for carrying large numbers of people over short distances. The biggest difference between trains and PeopleMovers is automation. While trains require an operator in the engine room, PeopleMover systems do not have a conductor, which begs the question, how does a train run without its engine? The answer lies not in the passenger cars, but rather in the tracks themselves. For smaller vehicles such as these, it can be much more efficient to place devices along the tracks that propel the vehicles in the direction you want them to go. Imagine a wheel spinning on the track as the PeopleMover passes. If you want it to go faster, you can speed it up through remote control. If you want the vehicle to slow, you can turn the wheels off. If one wheel along the track stops working, the PeopleMover can still function, as it continues down its path towards the next operational wheel. What this system means is lower maintenance cost, lower power cost, and a greener means of transportation. While trains run on a coal engine, PeopleMovers are electric. At the time of their development, PeopleMovers were intended to change the way communities ran. And for Walt Disney, the man pushing this technology forward, the PeopleMover was a key component of his ideal future for America. The precursor to the modern PeopleMover was a movement system developed by Disney for the Ford Magic Skyway ride in the 1964 World's Fair. When concepting ideas for the showcase, Walt and his team of Imagineers visited a Ford steel plant in Detroit. Walt was inspired by the way the factory moved ingot on a rolling track, guiding it through a system that would transform the ingot into steel. Upon seeing how this system operated, Walt instructed Imagineer Bob Gurr to create a similar conveyor belt style system, allowing the ride vehicles for the Ford exhibit to be automatically propelled forward. When the Ford Magic Skyway debuted, World's Fair guests boarded into Ford Mustangs and rode on a guided track through the exhibit. Riders moved up a ramp alongside large windows, allowing them to view the fairgrounds below. They then entered an exhibit showing prehistoric humans living alongside dinosaurs, ending with one human inventing the wheel, leading back into the theme of Ford automobiles. As for the cars themselves, they were merely shells with their engines removed, as the track itself propelled the riders forward. Reportedly, many Ford executives did not feel confident that this ride system would work. But when the exhibit was a big success, many of these executives remained wary of the ride's automated design. This kind of transit, if applied on a wider scale, could threaten the car industry as a whole. So when Walt decided to apply the concept to a new ride in Disneyland, Ford declined to sponsor it, and they were right to be concerned. Walt and his team were planning to use this ride system, which they had temporarily dubbed the PeopleMovers, in a new attraction that would transport viewers all around Tomorrowland, allowing riders to see all that the area had to offer. Rather than Ford automobiles, the new ride system would consist of small train cars and would be sponsored by Goodyear. But Walt's plans for this new mode of transportation spanned wider than just a simple theme park ride. He intended to utilize the PeopleMover system in his concept for the city of the future, known as EPCOT. EPCOT, the experimental prototype community of tomorrow, was meant to be Walt's greatest triumph, revolutionizing the way American cities operated. Walt had designed the city to help solve what he saw as the biggest problems in how the country operated. And high on Walt's list of concerns were the methods in which citizens traveled. Cars were overtaking the metropolitan environment in droves, slowing everything down, and many cities had not been designed with public transit in mind. So in EPCOT, the plan was to drastically minimize the use of cars, instead replacing transportation with the monorail for long-distance traveling from neighborhoods to the city's center, and the PeopleMover for short-distance traveling around the neighborhoods. At this point, the name PeopleMover had moved past a working title, becoming the label for this new form of transit. The People Movers in Disneyland were meant to be a test run of this advanced technology, in preparation for their implementation into the EPCOT project. Unfortunately, 7 months prior to the ride's opening, Walt Disney had suddenly passed away. In the wake of his absence, the company pumped the brakes on EPCOT and the further implementation of the People Mover system outside of Disneyland. What was once meant to revolutionize public transit seemed dead on arrival, confined to the fictional utopia housed within Tomorrowland. That is, until a new generation of People Movers debuted 8 years later in Walt Disney World. In 1975, Disney World debuted the Wedway People Movers in Tomorrowland. However, this was not simply a copy of the Disneyland ride. Instead, this was the second generation of the People Mover system, which eliminated the need for wheels in the track, opting instead to utilize what is known as a linear induction system. Instead of wheels placed periodically along the track, the Wedway People Movers were propelled by electromagnets embedded along the track, as well as on the bottom of the cars. By remotely controlling the magnetic pulses along the track, operators were able to more accurately control the speed of vehicles. And if operators needed to halt the ride at any point, they could reverse the polarity of the electromagnets, gently bouncing the vehicles back and forth until they could proceed. The only limitation to this upgrade was that it eliminated the ability for People Movers to ascend an incline like their Disneyland counterpart. But regardless, this was by and large a step forward for the technology. And once again, Disney had their eyes on doing more than creating theme park rides. They were planning to take the People Movers to market, pushing for their use in airports, shopping centers, and even public transit. In 1974, just a year before the debut of the Wedway People Movers, Disney patented their new linear induction technology, allowing them to stake a claim on this unique mode of transportation. Disney established Community Transportation Services as a subsidiary of WED Enterprises, their Imagineer division. This new leg of the company would take the People Mover and monorail technologies to governments and large organizations, advocating for a better path forward for public transit. In particular, Disney advertised their People Mover technology as cheaper, greener, and more efficient than typical subway systems. However, it would not be until 5 years later that they would secure their first contract. The Houston Intercontinental Airport in Texas, now known as the George Bush Intercontinental Airport, was seeking a replacement to their underground train system that transported travelers to different terminals. Reportedly, one Disney executive who had been traveling through the airport often became frustrated with the train's constant breakdowns. He mentioned to the director of the airport that Disney could provide them with a new transit system that would almost never break down. Although nothing came of the offer right away, in 1979, Disney secured a $14.5 million contract to have their People Mover technology replace the underground transit system. The Turner Construction Company completed the installation in 1981, and an unveiling was held at the airport, with Mickey, Donald, and the mayor of Houston all in attendance. This third-generation People Mover was quite different from its Disney World counterpart. The Houston People Mover had 8 trains with 3 cars each, which was larger than the previous model. They were also enclosed. While the Houston People Mover used the same linear induction propulsion system as Disney World, there was a need for the trains to be able to stop at each terminal. Disney World's People Movers are continually moving, and if there is a need for the ride to be stopped, the operators reverse the polarity of the magnets on the tracks, causing the vehicles to slow and even roll back slightly. Sometimes, this actually causes the Disney World People Movers to bump into one another, and while this is fine for a theme park ride, it would not work in an airport. So Disney's Imagineers developed a method for the train to stop and start again at boarding stations, in tandem with sliding doors that opened and closed at these stations. The way this system works is by having the motors below the train shut off, while a friction brake catches the train, allowing the passengers to exit and board before the motors turn back on. Part of the reason the Houston airport chose Disney's PeopleMovers was that the existing track layout was in a relatively small corridor in the basement of the airport, and the train needed to be able to make tight turns around the walls. While other systems could not accommodate this, PeopleMovers were a perfect fit for the airport transit system. The Houston PeopleMover moves around 2.9 million people annually, at a cost of about 9 cents per passenger mile, costing far less than many other subways could have. With the Houston Airport PeopleMover becoming a big success, it would be safe to assume that it was the first in a line of many Disney PeopleMovers around the country. Unfortunately, it seems this was not the case. Houston's PeopleMover was the only one Disney ever constructed outside of its parks. There seem to be many reasons for this. One is a lack of public funding available for new city transportation systems at the time. The other, more generally, is just the fact that building a new state-of-the-art railway system is a hard sell when buses and subways are already available. The PeopleMover may operate at a much lower cost and have lower maintenance costs on average, but they cost a lot to build, and to city and building planners, getting approval for such a unique project can be a hassle. But the main reason is that seemingly, Disney was not focused on the project. During this time, the company was helmed by Card Walker and Ron Miller, who were attempting to keep Disney afloat in the wake of Walt and Roy Disney's passing. However, box office numbers for Disney's animated films were steadily declining, and the company's relevance in pop culture was beginning to dwindle. With the company facing a crisis, Ron Miller was replaced as CEO by Michael Eisner in 1984, ushering in a new era for the company. Eisner and the new management team's goal was to reinstate Disney's place in culture by pushing out the old to make way for the new. And the PeopleMover project did not have a place in their new business strategy. The same year Eisner was appointed CEO, Disney sold the patents for their linear induction PeopleMovers to Bombardier, an engineering company that had helped redesign the monorail in Disney World. And in 1995, Disney would close the original PeopleMover, replacing it in 1998 with a new thrill ride called Rocket Rods, which would have guests speeding around the PeopleMover track, zipping their way through Tomorrowland. Unfortunately, because Disney did not redesign the PeopleMover track to bank into turns, the vehicles were forced to slow down significantly for each turn, causing the ride to be less thrilling than advertised. Rocket Rods also tended to break down quite a bit, and despite consistently long wait times, did not review well with many riders. Only 2 years after the ride debuted, the park closed the attraction for renovation. A year later, it was permanently closed. Many fans over the years have called for Disney to rebuild the original PeopleMovers, as the Disneyland track stands empty to this very day. Unfortunately, due to new codes and restrictions, and since the rails seem to be in bad shape, Disney would likely have to reconstruct the entire track, which is a difficult task since it stretches all across Tomorrowland. For these reasons, more than 2 decades later, the future of the Disneyland PeopleMover remains uncertain. All that is left is the empty track, towering over guests in Tomorrowland, serving as a reminder of Disney's broken promise for their transit system of the future. As for the Houston Airport's PeopleMover, it seems its lifetime is coming to an end soon. While maintenance costs for the system were meant to be smaller than other transit options, the reality is that after more than 40 years of operation, the Houston PeopleMover is showing its age. In 2024 and 2025, the airport has allocated $350,000 to replace the hardware and software at the PeopleMover's control facility. And recently, the airport has begun to have issues with rainwater running down into the basement area, putting the basement the PeopleMover runs through at risk of corrosion and long-term structural damage. And the airport hardly needs the Disney PeopleMover at this point anyway, because in 2010, the Walter P. Moore Company built a new above-ground automated PeopleMover known as Skyway. With the debut of this new transit system at the airport, many are not opting to use the Disney model down in the basement anymore. In fact, with the original Disney patents long since expiring, many companies have gotten into the business of making automated PeopleMovers, including Hyundai, Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, Hitachi, and Bombardier. These companies have taken the PeopleMover concept worldwide, into cities, airports, and shopping centers. One of the most famous and notable examples is the PeopleMover constructed by Bombardier underneath the United States Congress buildings. However, these days the term PeopleMover has come to refer to all kinds of automated railway systems. Some are run by cables, some are run by onboard engines, and some, just like those that came before, are run by linear induction motors. So in the end, although Disney's PeopleMover did not make it out of Anaheim, Orlando, and Houston, the legacy of their innovation spanned beyond their work in the transportation industry. Because as long as people continue moving from points A to B, they will rely on cars, trains, subways, and of course, PeopleMovers.